is forced to remove him.
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I would just direct him again. I think it would be to his advantage to look through the report, and then I think we should return to it after PMQs.
We now come to Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. High streets and heritage means a lot to the people of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork. Burslem and Tunstall, two of the great 6 towns of Stoke-on-Trent, are plagued with rogue and absent landlords who are too happy to let shops sit empty and historically important buildings such as Price and Kensington Teapot Works fall into ruin, which is why I introduced my proper maintenance of land bill to increase fines on these ruinous owners. Can my right honourable friend confirm that as part of the government's planning reform, he will adopt my bill which imposes a new unlimited fine so these reckless reprobates can be held accountable? Up the veil for Saturday, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Here, Mr. Speaker. Up the veil, but on his, I want to thank him, by the way, for his campaign. I think he's entirely right, and that's why we've adopted the measures that he proposes in the bill. Those who leave properties derelict unreasonably could face an unlimited fine, Mr. Speaker.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to meet the Prime Minister last week in Royal Hillsborough in my constituency. We welcome his commitment to introduce legislation to deal with the protocol on the Irish Sea border and to protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That will take some time. In the meantime, as in the rest of the United Kingdom, hard-pressed households in Northern Ireland are suffering from the cost of living crisis. Will the Prime Minister give me an assurance that any measures that are brought forward by the Chancellor in the near future to help hard-pressed households will apply to Northern Ireland, and that the protocol will not be allowed to prevent Northern Ireland citizens receiving the support they need from the government at this time?
I thank the right honourable gentleman very much. As he knows, we have a package of measures to support families across the whole of the UK that I've detailed already to the House. I may say that I also think it would be an advantage to the people of Northern Ireland in tackling the issues that we all face across the UK if Stormont were to be restored, Mr. Speaker.
Lynn Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent report on levelling up the rural economy highlighted many areas where more work is needed in small rural and coastal communities to ensure they also benefit from our levelling up agenda. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to ensure levelling up reaches into rural and coastal Devon? And will my right honourable friend meet with me and Helen Herford, our excellent candidate in Tiverton and Honiton, we can progress our plans for Devon?
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, because my honourable friend is a fantastic advocate for Devon, for rural communities, and I will make sure that both she and Helen Herford get a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss her ideas further.
Ben Lake.
Mr. Speaker, rising fuel costs are causing serious problems for workers in car-dependent rural areas like Ceredigion, and for carers and district nurses, the situation has reached a crisis point. One carer from Ceredigion often has to travel 29 miles just to reach the first service user of the day and travels around 1,700 miles each month. Would the Prime Minister therefore consider extending the rural fuel duty relief scheme to areas like Ceredigion to help my constituent and many like her to continue their invaluable work?
Well, I thank him for his excellent question, and I can tell him that rural fuel duty relief is there to compensate motorists by helping retailers in some more remote rural areas where pump prices can be significantly higher. It currently operates on a geographical basis, but Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to ensure that the honourable gentleman gets a meeting with the relevant minister as fast as possible.
Stevenson.
Prime Minister. Labour and socialism has failed this country because they have followed policies which interfere too much in people's lives, over-regulate, spend too much taxpayers' money, borrow too much and raise taxes. Could the Prime Minister tell the House what policies his government are going to follow to ensure we don't have a similar fate?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right, that Labour's instinct everywhere and always is to put up tax with all its that's what they're bragging about it today, Mr. Speaker. It's ludicrous. And what we are doing is not only cutting people's contributions under national insurance, but also helping businesses to invest with the 130% super deduction that my right honourable friend put in. And what that is doing is helping us to have a high-wage, high-skill economy with unemployment, and that's why I said this before, Mr. Speaker, at the lowest since 1974.
Jill Fairness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Days before the election of disgraced former Conservative MP Imran Ahmad Khan, his victim warned the Conservative Party of the abuse he had suffered. Sit down, sorry.
There's still, I think, an appeal in sub judice, so if you can be careful, I just word the question.
Shockingly, they failed to act on this report and still won't explain why. That's why Rotherham child sexual exploitation survivor Sammy Woodhouse has called for an independent investigation into the failure, warning that the Conservative Party have broken the trust of victims. So, will the Prime Minister personally back those calls and launch an independent investigation until the failure to act, so that victims can have confidence that his party will never again turn a blind eye to it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hear what she says and the sensitivity of the issues that she raises. I think that though, given the legal proceedings that are currently going on, I don't think it would be right to comment any further.
On Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, while the politics of politics often gets all the attention, back in the real world, millions of parents are being held back by issues with childcare schemes that have been a muddle over governments of all political colours, and I declare a quite obvious interest. The taxpayer is spending 5 to 6 billion quid a year, but we have some of the highest costs in the world during a cost of living squeeze, and Stroud parents and early years educators are really stuck with the bureaucracy. I know my right honourable friend has personally asked ministers to investigate options to reduce the cost of childcare. Will he tell us a little bit more about what we can do urgently and work with me with the think tank onward when we do our reforms?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank her very much, and she and I have talked about this. This is a subject in which I take a direct personal interest, and I think, Mr. Speaker, that there are things that we can do to make childcare more affordable. One of the issues is that not enough people take up tax-free childcare. We need to have more take-up of what is on offer. But what we can also look at, Mr. Speaker, is ways in which we can reform and improve the system.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month marks 5 years since the horrific Grenfell fire tower, which killed 72 people. My constituency, Vauxhall, has many tall buildings similar to Grenfell. In 2019, the Prime Minister rightly told this House, where the inquiry recommends government responsibility for fire safety, we will legislate accordingly. But, Mr. Speaker, last week the government dropped the inquiry's recommendation that personal evacuation plan should be in place for disabled residents, claiming basic safety would be too expensive. Grenfell United said that this showed that cutting costs is more important than the value of human life. So will the Prime Minister urgently reverse this deeply inhumane decision and not break another promise to this House?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. If there is an issue with fire safety in a building, then extra steps should be taken and remediation should be made. And when it comes to self-evacuation, Mr. Speaker, the Home Office has launched a new consultation to support the fire safety of residents who are unable to self-evacuate. But if she has further representations to make on that point, I'll be very happy to ensure she gets a meeting with the Minister in Duluth.
Mr. Speaker, I am not a cynical sort, but I was slightly perplexed this week when the Cabinet Secretary and the Director of Government Propriety and Ethics, no less, were banned from attending my committee to give evidence which had been scheduled for 2 months. I cannot possibly think why, Mr. Speaker. But I wonder which particular subjects my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was most concerned being raised by my committee. Was it the case of undeclared loans and donations in kind, security insights into appointments to the House of Lords, or indeed the consultation of the Propriety and Ethics units in ministerial appointments?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure him, I know he's not a cynic, he's one of nature's idealists, Mr. Speaker, and I will make sure that all relevant ministers and civil servants appear before his committee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is leading a long queue of Conservatives MPs lining up to show how out of touch they are. Bills are rising, people are struggling. A quarter of people in work in Putney earn less than the London living wage. They don't need to be told how to budget better, to learn how to cook, to buy value food. They already are. When will the Prime Minister get a grip on this crisis, and when will he bring in the windfall tax?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing for the people of Putney and indeed people throughout this country is making sure that we invest now in protecting them, as I've said to the House and I've said repeatedly, not just with the increases in universal credit or in the living wage, in the warm homes discount, in cutting fuel bills, but also, of course, with the £330 cut in NICs, Mr. Speaker. But the reason we can do this is because we have a robust economic position in which we have strong employment. That is giving us the revenue to pay and to cushion people in this difficult time. It would not have been possible if we'd listened to the Labour Party during COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend, tens of thousands of Huddersfield sporting fans are coming down to London. On Saturday, Huddersfield Giants are in their first Rugby League Challenge Cup final for over a decade. And on Sunday, it's Huddersfield Town in the Championship playoff final for a place in the Premier League. Will the Prime Minister, as well as wishing the best of luck to both Huddersfield teams, agree with me that the best way that Labour-run Kirklees Council can honour the sporting tradition of Huddersfield is following through with their pledge to house the new National Rugby League Museum in Huddersfield, in the birthplace, the George Hotel, and not pull out of that deal as they've indicated they want to do so?
Prime Minister.
Is that the Labour Council pulling out of their deal? Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised. All I can say is I congratulate him on his campaign for a National Rugby League museum, and I urge him to take it up with the Arts Council or other relevant bodies.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the cover of the pandemic, we've seen a massive shift in wealth from the poorest to the richest. A partying PM and a law-breaking rich list chancellor have lined the pockets of their wealthy pals, whilst upwards of 175,000 of our fellow citizens have died from COVID, and they're now sitting on their hands and laughing in our faces as the cost of living crisis and fuel poverty could well leave thousands more to die of cold in their own homes. So, Mr. Speaker, when we saw pictures of the PM partying in the middle of the pandemic, was he toasting his assault on the working class? And I ask him, how on earth does he sleep at night with so much blood on his filthy, privileged hands?
Mr. Speaker, from furlough onwards, everything we have done since the pandemic began has been to get money into the pockets of the working people of this country, and those are the people time and again that we have prioritised. And I do not for a moment, doubt, Mr. Speaker, that things are tough. I do not doubt it for a moment, but it is our intention to get this country through it, and we will get through it very well by putting our arms around people as we can and as we will because of the fiscal firepower that we have, Mr. Speaker, but also by making sure that we continue with the high wage, high skill, high employment economy that we have. And the best thing to get money into people's pockets, Mr. Speaker, is to have a job.
Jill Mortimer.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that when the right honourable member opposite spins his myth of a low-tax Labour Party, he clearly needs a memory job? Because, can I just remind you all that in 2019, you all stood on a manifesto that would have inflicted the highest tax burden on the people of this country in peacetime. That's probably why there's so few of you over there.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, they campaigned to put up taxes on business to the highest level this country has ever seen. That was his ambition, Mr. Speaker, and that is what they would do again. Be in no doubt, that's what they love to do. You can feel the lust for tax rising off those benches opposite, Mr. Speaker, and that is why there's never been a Labour government that left office with unemployment lower than when they came in.
Mr. Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the head of Ofgem advised MPs that the energy cap is due to increase to £2,800 in the autumn, more than double from last year. And I know the Prime Minister has been busy drafting and redrafting his half-assed apologies rather than helping the people of Bury South. But at which work event? Thank you, Mr. But at which work event did he realise Labour's call was the right thing to do, considering he and his party voted against it last week? Is it just to save his own neck?
I couldn't either hear the question or the advice I was being given. It might be helpful I could hear both. Prime Minister, did you manage to hear it?
Very much. Well, I heard enough, Mr. Speaker, to have a rough idea of the nonsense that he was talking. And what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is not only supporting people now, but we will continue to put our arms around the people of this country as we did during the pandemic and beyond.
Can I just say, moderate language is what we normally use. I don't find it. It doesn't suit the chair, and I don't think it suits the country, so please. John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will recall I've previously raised with him the plight of 170 British council contractors who remain in Afghanistan in fear of their lives, 85 of whom are deemed to be at very high risk. I met the refugee minister last week. It was a positive meeting, but we face bureaucracy which is preventing the FCDO from cutting through that bureaucracy and helping these people now, courtesy of the ACRS scheme. Will he help us cut through that red tape and help these people? We owe them a debt of obligation, and time is running out.
Well, I thank him very, very much. I'll see what we can do to help those particular people, but I just remind the House that we've not only evacuated 15,000 people under Op Pitting, which I think was a great credit to this country, we've supported since then 4,600 more have come to this country, and we'll do what we can to help the people that he mentions.
Boris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jubilee Lead Academy in my constituency, working with Nottingham citizens, recently asked me to visit the school to hear about their low pay campaign. They're tired of seeing people in our community working hard but living in poverty. And now bills are rising, inflation's at 9%, and yet the government seems incapable and frankly a little disinterested in doing anything to help out. Mr. Speaker, our children can see the need for emergency action. Why can't our government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everybody in work, 30 million workers will get a tax cut in July, on top of everything that we're already doing. But that is not the end of what this government is going to do to look after people. And I've told the House before this afternoon, that we will continue to use our fiscal firepower to look after the British people through the COVID aftershocks and beyond.
Craig Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday at 3:25, a school bus crashed into a group of school children in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerynion. 3 children were airlifted to hospital, with another child and the bus driver taken by ambulance, and a 5th child was discharged at the scene. Everyone is in a stable condition. Clearly, this is a tragic accident that will stay with the community for some time. Will the Prime Minister join me, and I'm sure the whole House, in sending our love and prayers to those in hospital? And will he also praise the teaching staff of both the primary and high school, the Welsh Air Ambulance, Dyfed Powys Police, for their heroic response and their continuing response to the community?
I thank my honourable friend for raising this very, very sad incident, and I'm sure the whole House, his thoughts, Mr. Speaker, will be with those who have been affected, and I want to join him in particular in paying tribute to the emergency services, but also, of course, the teachers and the staff of the school who did so much to help.
Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, my constituent Robert Walker sadly died last year. He worked for MI6 and as such disclosed in confidence that he was a gay man. This confidence was breached by the HR department at the Foreign Commonwealth Office. Recently unearthed paperwork showed that this breach largely accounted for his well-being and enforced early retirement. Would the Prime Minister offer Bob's partner, Stephen Honeyman, a posthumous apology and commit to ask the Foreign Commonwealth Office for a formal response to his treatment while he worked at MI6?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by saying how grateful I am to the honourable member for raising this case, but I have to tell her I'm afraid I don't know directly about the events that she describes. What she says is very concerning. I'll make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister as soon as possible.
That ends Prime Minister's questions. For those who wish to leave. We now, can I just say to the House, I expect moderate and temperate language. As we come to the statement, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will make a statement. I'm grateful to Sue Gray for her report today, and I want to thank her for the work that she's done. I also thank the Metropolitan Police for completing their investigation, and I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the Cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Sue Gray's report has emphasised that it is up to the political leadership in Number 10 to take ultimate responsibility, and of course I do. But since these investigations have now come to an end, this is my first opportunity to set out some of the context and to explain both my understanding of what happened and also to explain what I have previously said to this House. And it's important to set out that over a period of about 600 days, gatherings on a total of 8 dates have been found to be in breach of the regulations in a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats. Mr. Speaker, I do think it is important because this is the first time I've had a chance I've had to set out the context. Hundreds of staff are entitled to work, and in the Cabinet Office, which has thousands of officials and now is the biggest it's been in any point in its 100-year history. And that is in itself one of the reasons why the government is now looking for change and reform. Mr. Speaker, those staff working in Downing Street were permitted to continue attending their office for the purpose of work, and the exemption under the regulations applied to their work because of the nature of their jobs reporting directly to the Prime Minister. These people were working extremely long hours, doing their best to give this country the ability to fight the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that this is no mitigation, but it is important to set out
Prime Minister,
context.
please, just one second. Can I just appeal to the House? I expect it to be heard, and I want everybody to hear it. And I want the same respect to be shown to the Leader of the Opposition afterwards. So please, this is a very, very important statement that the country wants to hear as well. Prime Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to set out the context, not to mitigate or to absolve myself in any way. The exemption under which they were present in Downing Street includes those circumstances where officials and advisers were leaving the government. And it was appropriate to recognise them, to thank them for the work that they have done. Let me come to that, Mr. Speaker. I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership, and particularly important when people need to feel that their contributions have been appreciated and to keep morale as high as possible. I'm trying to explain the reasons I was there, Mr. Speaker. And it's clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules, and they fell foul of the rules. I have to tell the House, because the House will need to know this, and again, this is not to mitigate or to extenuate, I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled by some of the behaviour, particularly in the treatment of the security and the cleaning staff. And I would like to apologise to those members of staff. And I expect anyone who behaved in that way to apologise to them as well. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I said, and I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance have been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building. So I would like to correct the record, to take this opportunity, not in any sense to absolve myself of responsibility, which I take and have always taken, but simply to explain why I spoke as I did in this House. Mr. Speaker, in response to her interim report, Sue Gray acknowledges that very significant changes have already been enacted. She writes, and I quote, "I am pleased that progress is being made in addressing the issues I raised." And she adds, "Since my update, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street in the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability, and now these need the chance and time to bed in." Number 10 now has its own permanent secretary charged with applying the highest standards of governance. There are now easier ways for staff to voice any worries, and Sue Gray welcomes that, and I quote, "Steps have since been taken to introduce more easily accessible means by which to raise concerns electronically, in person or online, including directly with the permanent secretary." The entire senior management has changed. There is a new chief of staff, an elected member of this House, who also commands the status of a cabinet minister. There is a new director of communications, a new principal private secretary, and another of other key appointments in my office. I am confident with the changes and new structures that are now in place that we are humbled by the experience, and we have learned our lesson. And I want to conclude by saying that Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I want to conclude by saying that whatever the failings of we'll come to that. And whatever the failings of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office throughout this very difficult period, and my own, for which I take full responsibility, I continue to believe that the civil servants and advisers in question, hundreds of them, thousands of them, some of whom, Mr. Speaker, are the very people who've received fines, are good, hard-working people, motivated by the highest calling to do the very best for our country. And I will always be proud of what they achieved, including procuring essential life-saving PPE, creating the biggest testing program in Europe, and helping to enable the development and distribution of the vaccine which got this country through the worst pandemic of a century. And now, Mr. Speaker, we must get our country through the aftershocks of COVID with every ounce of ingenuity and compassion and hard work. So I hope that today, as well as learning the lessons from Sue Gray's report, which I'm glad I commissioned, and again, I repeat I'm grateful to her. I hope very much that now that she has reported, we will be able to move on and focus on the priorities of the British people, standing firm against Russian aggression, easing the hardship caused by the rising costs that people are facing, fulfilling our pledges to generate a high-wage, high-skill, high-employment economy that will unite and level up across the whole of our United Kingdom. That is my mission, that is our mission, that is the mission of the whole of the government, and we will work day and night to deliver it, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The door of number 10 Downing Street is one of the great symbols of our democracy. Those who live behind it exercise great power, but they do so knowing their stay is temporary. Long after they've gone, that door and the democracy it represents will remain firm and unyielding. But Britain's constitution is fragile. It relies on members of this House and the custodians of number 10 behaving responsibly, honestly, and in the interests of the British people. When our leaders fall short of these standards, this House has to act. For months, members opposite have asked the country to wait. First, for the police investigation, which concluded that this Prime Minister is the first in our country's history to have broken the law in office. Then they asked the country to wait for the Sue Gray report. They need wait no longer. That report lays bare the rot that under this Prime Minister has spread in number 10, and it provides definitive proof of how those within the building treated the sacrifices of the British people with utter contempt. When the dust settles and the anger subsides, this report will stand as a monument to the hubris and the arrogance of a government that believed it was one rule for them and another rule for everyone else. The details are stark. 5 months ago, the Prime Minister told this House all guidance was completely followed in number 10. Yet we now know he attended events on the 17th of December. At least one of those attending has received a fine for it, deeming it illegal. We know that on the 18th of December an event was held in which staff drank excessively, which others in the building described as a party, and that cleaners were left to mop up the red wine the next day. On the 20th of May, as a COVID press conference was taking place, one of his senior officials was told, "Be mindful, cameras are leaving, don't walk about waving bottles." It is now impossible to defend the Prime Minister's words to this House. This is about trust. Because during that May 20 press conference, the British public were told normal life as we know it is a long way off. But that wasn't the case in number 10. Even now, after 126 fines, they think it's everyone else's fault but theirs. They expect others to take the blame whilst they cling on. They pretend that the Prime Minister has somehow been exonerated, as if the fact that he only broke the law once is worthy of praise. The truth is, they set the bar for his conduct lower than a snake's belly. And now they expect the rest of us to congratulate him as he stumbles over it. Number 10 symbolises the principles of public life in this country: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. But who could read this report and honestly believe the Prime Minister has upheld those standards? The reason the British public have had to endure this farce was his refusal to admit the truth or do the decent thing when he was found to have broken the law. This report was necessary because of what Sue Gray describes as failures of leadership and judgment for which senior political leadership must bear responsibility. It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful. It is precisely because he cannot lead that it falls to others to do so. I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compel...
Sorry. Can I just calm it down? Quite rightly, I wanted to the Prime Minister. I expect the same of the Leader of the Opposition. Now, those who don't wish to hear, please, go and have a cup of tea or something. Kiss that, man.
I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compare a perfectly legal takeaway while working to this catalogue of criminality looks even more ridiculous today. But, Mr. Speaker, if the police decide otherwise, I will do the decent thing and step down. The public need to know that not all politicians are the same. That not all politicians put themselves above their country. That honesty, integrity and accountability matter. Members on the opposite benches now also need to show leadership. This Prime Minister is steering the country in the wrong direction. They can hide in the back seat, eyes covered, praying for a miracle, or they can act. Stop this out-of-touch, out-of-control Prime Minister from driving Britain towards disaster. We waited for the Sugre report. The country can't wait any longer. The values symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. Members opposite must finally do their bit. They must tell the current inhabitant, their leader, that this has gone on too long. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office and the democracy that it represents.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman talks about what went on in number 10 Downing Street and the events behind that black door, and the number of the events. And all I will say to him is that he, throughout the pandemic, was not leading many thousands of people in the fight against coronavirus. He was sniping from the sidelines and veering from one position to the next. And today, Mr. Speaker, he's done it again. Week after week, he could have come to this House and talked about the economy, about Ukraine, about the cost of living. No, Mr. Speaker, time after time, he chose to focus on this issue. He could have shown some common sense, Mr. Speaker, and recognised that when people are working very hard together, day in, day out, that it can be difficult to draw the boundary, Mr. Speaker, between work and socialising. And yet, after months of his, frankly, sanctimonious obsession, Mr. Speaker, the great gaseous zeppelin of his pomposity has been permanently punctured and irretrievably by the revelation that he is himself, he didn't mention this, he is himself under investigation by the police, Mr. Speaker, and yet, I'm not going to mince my words, I've got to say this, Sabir Korma, Mr. Speaker, is currently failing to hold himself to the same high standards that he demanded of me. It's true. He called for me to resign, Mr. Speaker, when the investigation began. Why is he in his place?
Mr. Holden, it's the second time. Please, help me to help you, because I'm sure you want to hear the rest of it. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he should at least be consistent and hold himself to the same standards. He's still there, and so is the shadow deputy leader. And Mr. Speaker, I apologise when the revelations emerged. I continue to apologise. I repeat that I am humbled by what has happened, and we have instituted profound changes throughout Number 10. But I think in view of the mess that he has found himself in himself, it would now be a sensible thing for him too to apologise, so that we can all collectively move on, Mr. Speaker. And that, I think, is what the people of this country want to see above all. They want to see leadership from this House of Commons, leadership from both parties, Mr. Speaker, in dealing with their priorities. And that is why we are focused on getting through the aftershocks of COVID. That's why I'm proud of what we did to roll out the fastest vaccine campaign in Europe. And that's why I'm proud that we now have the lowest unemployment anywhere in this country for 50 years, Mr. Speaker. That is what the people of this country want. I appreciate that he has his points to make, but I think overwhelmingly the will of this country is for us now to say thank you to Sue Gray, and for us collectively to move on.
Sir Robert Butland.
You, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend well knows the rules apply to him as much to all of us. And the rules of this House are clear that anybody who comes here and deliberately lies and misleads this House should leave their position, resign or apologise. My right honourable friend has been asked many times about specific incidents, specific events that Sue Gray has outlined. Has he on any occasion come to this House in response to specific questions about specific events and deliberately lied to us?
No, Mr. Speaker, for the reason I have given, that at the time that I spoke to this House, I believe that what I was doing was to attend work events, and with the exception of the event in the Cabinet room, that is a view that has been vindicated by the investigation.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I speak, the public is poring over the sordid details of what went on out of the public eye, behind the high gates and the walls of the Prime Minister's residence, and the report is damning. It concludes, many gatherings and many individuals did not adhere to COVID guidance. Events were attended by leaders in government and should not have been allowed to happen. Junior civil servants believed their involvement was permitted by the attendance of senior leaders. There was an unacceptable lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff. And crucially, Mr. Speaker, the senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, must bear responsibility for this culture. That leadership came from the top. And the Prime Minister, in the words of the report, must bear responsibility for the culture. A fish rots from the head. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's dispatch box denial of a party taking place on the 13th of November is now proven to be untrue. He was there on the 13th of November, photographed, raising a toast, surrounded by gin, wine and other revellers. The charge of misleading Parliament is a resignation matter. Will the Prime Minister now finally resign? This Prime Minister has adopted a systematic, concerted and sinister pattern of evasion. Truthfulness, honesty and transparency do not enter his vocabulary. It is just not part of his way of being, and it speaks for the type of man that he is. Credibility, truth, morality all matter, and the Prime Minister has been found lacking time and time again, and he can shake his head, but that's the reality, Prime Minister. Ethics have to be part of our public life, and ethical behaviour has to be at the core of the demeanour and the response of any Prime Minister. The Prime Minister brings shame on the office and has displayed contempt not only to the members of this House, but to every single person who followed the rules. They stayed away from family, those who missed funerals, those who lost someone they loved. So when the Tory members opposite retire to the 1922 committee this evening, I hope they will bear in mind the now infamous government advert featuring a desperately ill COVID patient. It said, "Look into her eyes and tell her you never bend the rules." If they don't submit a letter, if they don't remove this Prime Minister, how will they ever look at their constituents in the eye ever again?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the right honourable gentleman should look closely at her Sue Gray's report, and I repeat my thanks to her. I stress that the nature and length of my involvement in these events is very clear from what she says, and I take full responsibility for what happened, and that is why we've taken the steps that we have to reform and improve the way Number 10 works. Where we are humbled by what has happened, and we have changed it.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since I've been elected to this House, I've been running a campaign called Listening to Wellingborough and Rushden. And you may recall on one occasion that group asked me to present a letter at PMQ calling for a previous Prime Minister to resign. What they're telling me today, Mr. Speaker, is their concerns are the terrible war in Ukraine, the illegal immigrants crossing the Channel, and the economy. And their message to the Prime Minister is to get on with the job. Does he agree with the Listening to Wellingborough and Rushden campaign?
I agree with it. I agree with them profoundly and passionately, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said that on the 13th of November 2020, the ABBA party he attended briefly. His defence was a job interview. Can he confirm he was only in his flat and he met Henry Newman to discuss a job? And can he confirm what the other special advisers were doing? Were they part of the job interview as well?
Mr. Speaker, that evening was extensively investigated, to the best of my knowledge, and I don't believe I can improve on what Sue Gray has had to say.
Tobias Elwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a damning report about the absence of leadership, focus and discipline in Number 10, the one place where you expect to find those attributes in abundance. I made my point and my position very clear to the Prime Minister. He does not have my support. But a question I humbly put to my colleagues is, are you willing, day in and day out, to defend this behaviour publicly? Can we continue to govern without distraction, given the erosion of the trust with the British people? And can we win the general election on this current trajectory? The question I place to the Prime Minister is now, Mr. Speaker, I'm being heckled by my own people. If we cannot work out what we're going to do, then the broad church of the Conservative Party will lose the next general election. But my question to the Prime Minister is very clear on the question of leadership. Can he think of any other Prime Minister who would have allowed such a culture of indiscipline to take place under their watch? And if it did, would they not have resigned?
Mr. Speaker, I think to answer the question that he put to all of us on these benches, I think the answer is overwhelmingly and emphatically yes, we are going to go on and win the next general election, because we're going to get on with the job, Mr. Speaker.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he's sorry, but he's only sorry he got caught. He didn't care then, as he parted during lockdown, when people couldn't see their dying loved ones. He didn't care last year when he insisted that no rules had been broken. And he doesn't care now, when families across our country are struggling to heat their homes, fill their cars and put food on the table, with a cost of living crisis that has only deepened while the Prime Minister has been scrambling to save his own skin. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister look the British people in the eye and name one person, just one person, he cares about more than himself?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell him that there are people in number 10 Downing Street, including me, who cared passionately about making sure that we had the PPE that we needed, we had the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, and that we protected this country from COVID. And that is what people were doing. And I may say that the abuse that has been directed at civil servants and officials is, I think, wholly unwarranted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I think of civil servants and advisers during that period, I think of the brilliant civil servants who helped move mountains to create the shielding programme within a matter of days. I think of the brilliant civil servants and advisers that got 90% of homeless people off the streets within days. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that these achievements and others should mean that nothing in this report is a stain upon the character of the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of civil servants, whether in number 10, other government departments, or across the country, who helped steer this country through the pandemic? And secondly, difficult though this is to say for many, with a war in Europe, with an economic crisis, with the challenges this country faces, is it not really true that it is now time to turn a page, and for this country, our politics and this House to move forwards?
I agree with him absolutely passionately, Mr. Speaker. I think the best thing, I think we can study the report, we can draw the conclusions that we want. The best thing now for our country is to move forwards together, and that's what we're going to do.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Mr. Speaker, we all understand, and the Prime Minister understands, that not being truthful on the floor of this House requires a resignation. My honourable friend, the member for Hornsey and Wood Green, asked the Prime Minister a point-blank question on the floor of this House when he was at that dispatch box. She asked him if he had been to a party on the 13th of November in 10 Downing Street. He said he hadn't and that no party had happened. There are 4 pictures of it. There are 4 pictures of it, Mr. Speaker, featured in the Sue Gray report. Will the Prime Minister account now, on the floor of the House, for his answer to that very specific question?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and I tried to do it in what I said earlier on, and the answer is that it's part of my job to say thank you to people who work in government. That's what I was doing. I believed it was a work event, and indeed there has been no fine issued to me as a result of my attendance at that event, because that is what I was doing.
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I commend Sue Gray for the report, and I do understand why people are angry. Having looked at the pictures of the birthday party in the Cabinet Office, I think the opposition are going to be quite hard-pressed to explain why they have such moral outrage about that, but not about the late-night beers that happened just down there. However, one of the things I was very troubled by was the language that was used towards the custodian. Would the Prime Minister join with me now, and I'm sure the whole House would agree, the level of respect and gratitude that we have to every single cleaner and worker and all the people in the tea room that work in this place? Thank you, sir.
I thank her very, very much, and I agree very much with what she has just said. And I think that as I said in my opening statement, Mr. Speaker, I think the behaviour towards any rudeness towards a member of staff is absolutely inexcusable, and I want whoever was responsible to apologise.
Tamanji Singh Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I feel as if I have completely let down those who showered me with so much love. Why wasn't I by the bedside of my lovely grandmother during her final few days? Why did I let her die alone in that hospital? Why did I not attend the funeral of my uncle
because of worries about government restrictions on numbers. And why did I not go to comfort my brother-in-law's father as he was dying in a Slough care home? Why, with all of this context, it is utterly hypocritical for those individuals who were preaching to us ad nauseum about patriotism, the flag and the Queen, for those very people to then be having late-night parties, including 2 on the night before the Queen had to sit all alone during her husband's funeral when the country was in a state of national mourning. Absolutely shameless. So, Prime Minister, given that the Prime Minister is not going to do the right and honourable thing, does he agree with me that it is not the support and sympathy of the British people that is keeping him in power, the majority of whom want him to resign? It is the support and sympathy of those concerned...
Order! Order! I'm sorry, but it's meant to be a question, and also we don't normally bring monarch into proceedings. And I'm sure that the Prime Minister will have got the gist, and quite really, I understand the emotions behind it, but it's going to be short of Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry for the honourable gentleman's loss, and he has a perfect right to speak with the passion that he does. All I can say is that I take full responsibility for what happened. I do, and we have made extensive changes.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, I believe both leaders have a lot to answer for with regards to this issue. The British Army teaches you, or certainly believes at its very core, that you serve to lead and you lead by example. Given the extent of rule-breaking in Number 10, does my right honourable friend believe that what he has said to the House since about there being no rule-breaking passed the test of reasonableness?
I think he's asking exactly the right question, and I understand why he asks it. But I've tried to give my answer to him and to the House, which is that I believe that I was attending work events. Those are the ones of which I had knowledge, and with the exception of what took place in the cabinet room in June of 2020, that view has been sustained by the investigation.
Janet Charry.
Speaker, neither I nor my Edinburgh South West constituents would wish to live in a state where the government of the day could influence the police in the exercise of their duty to investigate without fear or favour. So we're puzzled as to why the Prime Minister didn't receive questionnaires in respect of 3 gatherings where other people in Number 10 received questionnaires. And we're also puzzled as to why the ABBA party in the Prime Minister's flat has never been investigated either by Sue Gray or the Metropolitan Police. So can I ask the Prime Minister what can be done by way of an independent investigation to assure me and my constituents that the Metropolitan Police have not been nobbled?
Well, that would greatly surprise me, Mr. Speaker, but I think she should look more closely at Sue Gray's report, because I think she will find the answer she needs.
Michael Babrickan.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the outrage of people in Lichfield and Burntwood, and indeed the honourable gentleman opposite, who have lost loved ones. But I also understand, having been an employer, that attending an event where someone is leaving is considered to be a working event. And my right honourable friend clearly got guidance that turned out to be wrong. So can he now explain how the appointment of a new permanent secretary at Number 10 will make a difference in the future?
I thank him very much, and what we're doing is not only the structure of Number 10 has changed, so there's more direct command and control for the whole building, which was a little bit unclear before. And so there is a new permanent secretary with direct responsibility for the whole office, as it were, hundreds and hundreds of people, as opposed to that function being nominally to be addressed by the principal private secretary. And the lines of, as Sue Gray said, the lines of command were not clear. Sue Gray.
Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After months of shuffling around, prevarication and book passing,
This report makes it absolutely clear that when the British public were taking those restrictions seriously, the Prime Minister was taking the British public for fools. That's why the Prime Minister and his government cannot now be taken seriously. Isn't it time he said goodbye so that the rest of us could say good riddance?
Mr. Speaker, I really don't think that the government can be blamed for the delay that he complains of. It took a long time for the Met to do their work. It was exhaustive, and I don't believe that it sustains the conclusion that he has drawn. Not at all.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I asked the Prime Minister about Sugray's interim findings on the 31st of January, he asked me to wait for the inquiry report. He asked many members that day to do the same thing. Subsequently, he has asked the media to wait for the findings of the report, and he knows that many colleagues on these benches have told their constituents they're waiting for the inquiry report. So I was very surprised to read in the Times the intimation that he may have asked Sue Gray not to publish the report at all. Is there any truth to that suggestion, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, what Sue Gray has published is entirely for Sue Gray, and it is a wholly independent report, Mr. Speaker.
Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, the last time I asked the Prime Minister a question on this subject, I said the problem with him, and I've got on with him over the years, is he is a serial offender. And even serial offenders, if they actually confess that they've done wrong and then repent for what they've done, they can actually be forgiven because they're mending their ways. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but today's performance from the Prime Minister shows no real remorse, trying to shift the back on other people, and I believe now, with all many faces I see on the other side, that he should now resign.
Mr. Speaker, I've apologised, and I am, as I have said, deeply contrite about what happened. I take responsibility. We are affecting and have done a huge amount of change already in number 10, but it is my judgment that the best thing for the country is now to move on from this issue and to learn the lessons.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Given the cavalier way in which these rules were interpreted in number 10, does my right honourable friend agree that rules of such intrusiveness and rigidity must never again be imposed on the British people as a whole?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we were dealing with a pandemic that was absolutely unprecedented, and we did not have any immediate tools to control it short of a vaccine without asking people to restrict their behaviour. I'm sure there are plenty of lessons we can learn from the future about how to do it better, and I'm sure that will be a matter for the inquiry.
Angus Brendan MacNeill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While he is still unwittingly a great asset for Scottish independence, the question everywhere, however, is how to goodness is he still Prime Minister of this current United Kingdom?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the answer to that question is contained in the continued support of the people of the United Kingdom for our union, and despite everything that they are doing to try to overturn the democratic verdict of 2014, I don't believe that they will succeed.
Natalie Elphick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his further apology and his explanation today, which is important for many of my constituents. Does he note paragraph 4 of page 36 of the Sue Gray report that says, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street and the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability? And does he agree with her that these changes need to bed in and that the focus of our government must be laser-like in tackling the cost of living crisis that has come about as a result of the COVID pandemic and Ukraine, and that this is the concern over and above everything else of my constituents?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the gentleman opposite says that answer, and I will. I agree. I agree completely with what she has just said, and that's why we're going to get on with the job.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a load of baloney. Excuse after excuse after excuse, and it simply doesn't wash, and it won't wash with the British public, who are sick and tired of being taken for fools. The truth is, the Prime Minister encouraged the gatherings. He attended the gatherings. He poured the drinks at the gatherings. And he even raised a toast at the gatherings, so he knew perfectly well that these gatherings had taken place. And the most despicable thing of all is that Sue Gray says she saw multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff because they knew what the rules meant, even if nobody else does. Does he show no contrition, no sense of shame that Downing Street under him has been a cesspit full of arrogant, entitled narcissists?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said to the House already, I think that it is absolutely disgraceful in any circumstances to be rude to people who are helping you, and rude to staff, rude to custodians. It's intolerable, and I will make sure that those who are guilty of it apologise or are otherwise disciplined.
Jack Brereton.
Mr. Speaker, now we've had this report and the Prime Minister has repeatedly apologised, does my right honourable friend not agree that we should be focusing on the real issues that matter to the British public, which is...
Sorry for one. Both of you, I think, need for a cup of tea outside because I can't hear with you both shouting. So a separate debate was trying to be created, but we don't need to worry anymore. Jack Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend not agree we should focus on the real issues that matter to the British people, dealing with the cost of living and also the issues with Russia's invasion of Ukraine? And given what happened in Durham, it's the only people left to apologise in this chamber are on those Labour benches, on the Labour front benches opposite.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think those people in glass houses should not throw stones.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
To call this a damning report for the Prime Minister is an understatement. It states the senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, must bear responsibility for this culture, both political and official. For 168 days, he's used Sue Gray as a human shield against this duty. In this farce of a parliamentary system, it's now all down to Tory MPs, and there are not many left here, for them to grow a backbone and oust this moral vacuum of a Prime Minister. Will he spare them the trouble and resign?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank Sue Gray for bringing this report to us today, and, of course, the Metropolitan Police for concluding their inquiries before that. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that investigations should be carried out without outside interference or statements towards the police or others? And would the Prime Minister now urge the Leader of the Opposition to respect this too with regards to Durham Constabulary?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that sounds like very sound advice.
Absul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My mother, my father-in-law, and my mother-in-law are just three of the nearly 180,000 people who died from COVID-19 in Britain. The laws broken by the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, and others were not victimless crimes. They were not silly rules and meaningless red tape. They were designed to protect lives. Mr. Speaker, the doctors and nurses who cared for my relatives at North Manchester General Hospital were not clocking off for Wine Time Friday. So for the first time in his life, will the Prime Minister do the right thing and resign?
No, Mr. Speaker, but I want to assure him that I understand the reasons why he feels as he does, but I also want to say that everybody in Number 10 took the pandemic with the utmost seriousness. I agree for his loss. We were doing our best to contain a very, very difficult situation.
Craig McKinley.
Speaker, my right honourable friend will be aware that I voted against much of this COVID legislation over the last couple of years because I felt a lot of it was pettifogging, ridiculous and unnecessary. I think an apology should be paid by this entire House to the British people to allow a lot of this nonsense legislation to be in place. whereas I have great comfort and respect that the courts tend to come to the same conclusion for the same offences, it would seem that the legislation that we passed allowed an individual police force to come to different conclusions, and certainly different police forces. Because of the photos I've seen, I'd much rather have been at the curry and beer than the birthday party that the Prime Minister had in the Cabinet room.
I thank him very much, and all I can say is that those matters are for the relevant forces.
Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the Prime Minister has any credibility left, because my constituents tell me that they don't believe what he says. So I want to ask the Prime Minister about what I think to be the bare minimum in this situation. When it comes to the cleaning staff and the security staff in number 10 treated with a lack of respect, has the Prime Minister personally apologised to them?
I thank her. This is the first that I've seen of the detailed criticisms of civil servants for that abuse. I've said that I think it's intolerable, and I will make sure that staff, custodians, cleaners who were treated disrespectfully get a proper apology. I've apologised to them today. I've apologised to them today already from this dispatch box.
Rarely in my 21 years in this House have I heard such utter drivel in what we've been presented today. I've tried to find words to capture what the Prime Minister said. Disingenuous, delusional, slippery, self-serving, and I know I can't say dishonest in this place. No attempt at remorse, all somebody else's fault. Surely if he was half the man that he thinks he is, he would summon that self-respect and just go.
Yeah. I direct him to what I've already said.
Barbara Keeler.
I want to quote the following to the Prime Minister, and all those on his side, we've just heard one, who want to suggest the COVID rules didn't matter. It's from palliative care doctor, Dr. Rachel Clark. To NHS staff, it was abundantly clear that the way you survive a pandemic is together. In 2020, collective compliance was all NHS patients had to protect them. Basic, selfless public decency mattered. Rules were hated but obeyed because we care about each other. And that glass of wine in the PM's hand, it's been thrown in the face of all of us. How does he reply to that?
Mr. Speaker, I wish things could have been handled better, and I wish things we got things right in number 10 in the way that we didn't. And I apologise again for things that got wrong, but we've already changed the way we work, and I really think it's time that the country moved on.
Wendy Chamberlain.
The Prime Minister has previously stated that PartyGate investigations would be fully complied with, but today there are reports that senior staff simply didn't answer the questionnaires and as a result have avoided being fined. Can the Prime Minister therefore confirm whether all senior staff at number 10, including himself, met their obligations and replied to the Metropolitan Police in full?
As she knows, those are a matter for the Met.
Not sure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said, "I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership." He wouldn't need no leadership if it hit him in the face from where my constituents stand. And I'll tell him why. Because there's doctors who gave their lives. Their families weren't allowed to attend their funerals. I was on the phone when the trust I work with had to make decisions of leadership to separate people from not being able to see their dying relatives. I was on the phone to somebody whilst they died, begging me to let them see him. That's what leadership is, when those were difficult decisions they had to make, when nurses couldn't go home and had to book into hotels so they didn't spread infections. So if he had an ounce of leadership, he'd resign, so why doesn't he?
I refer her to what I've already said.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's credibility is like a slow puncture. He reinflates it occasionally, but isn't the truth? His party needs a new front wheel.
Mr. Speaker, I think they really need to ask a new question.
Kate Land.
have to say I'm absolutely appalled by the behaviour of some members in this chamber today. They're refusing to accept responsibility. They're jeering and cheering and saying, let's move on. Well, can I tell you, Prime Minister, there's a young man in Blackburn who can't move on because due to a wart on his head, rather than getting an appointment with a doctor, he was asked to send in a picture. 3 months later, he was actually told he had stage 4 cancer. So the impact is widespread, the damage is long-lasting, and this young man cannot even get the treatment because they say they won't fund it. Does the Prime Minister feel no shame that he just totally trashed rules that he made, expected other people to live with? He wants to move on and other people are left with the consequences. Surely the Prime Minister must resign.
No, Mr. Speaker, we want to get on with addressing the COVID backlogs, which is what we're doing.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sometimes wonder if the Prime Minister has a neck of pure brass. Does he understand and recognise the words honesty, integrity and accountability? No. Because from my position, I don't think he does. Many members have spoken of personal things and personal tragedies they've gone through. The country needs a new leader. Yes, we need to move on, but we shouldn't need to lead on with you, Prime Minister. Will you now resign?
Mr. Speaker, I think that I'm just going to repeat my previous answer.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's leadership, his behaviour drives the culture in our politics, but also in our country. And it also gives licence to others to behave in a similar matter. So if he is genuine in his apology, and he's not, will he firstly ensure that the ministerial and members' codes have the Nolan principles incorporated into them and put them on the statute? And secondly, will he condemn those Oldham Conservative candidates who delivered toxic, racist, misogynistic leaflets during the recent local elections? His chairman has details of that.
I'd be very happy to look at those details if she'll send them to me.
Carol Monaghan. Right, let's pick somebody else. Dan Jarvis.
Serve to lead. That's the motto of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. And everybody serving in our armed forces knows that if the commanding officer of a unit had presided over the kind of shambles we'd seen in Downing Street, they would be discharged of their duties. Why is it different from the Prime Minister?
Is he referring to the vaccine programme, the PPE securing, or the fact that we came out of COVID faster than any other European country?
Anand Kesar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A comment that sickened me from the Sugray report was, and I quote, "I was made aware of multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff. The Prime Minister has made a public apology at the dispatch box, but when will he personally apologise to those hard-working cleaning staff who risked every day to ensure that everyone was kept safe?"
I thank you very much, and just to repeat what I said both earlier on and to the honourable lady opposite, when I've identified the custodians, the cleaners, the staff in question, of course I will talk to them myself.
Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One address, 20 months, 204 questionnaires, 345 documents, 510 photos, including the ones on page 38 onwards, of him raising a toast when he should be toast. And as a result of this, 126 fines, mostly to 83 junior staffers, while all the while the police were routinely fining people greater amounts than his 50 quid for far lesser offences. Doesn't this all point to a conclusion that not everyone is as equal under the law as each other these days?
I think that there's a criticism of the Metropolitan Police contained in what she's just said, which I don't agree with.
Corinne Smith.
The problem with this report, Mr. Speaker, is the dates outlined so clearly reopen many of our wounds. But I'm going to ask the Prime Minister a question that has been asked earlier that he didn't answer, from the member for Newcastle under Lyme. When he met with Sue Gray recently this week? Did he ask her not to publish this report?
No, Mr. Speaker, and what I can tell the honourable lady is that this is a wholly independent report, and the judgments contained in it are a matter for Sue Gray. I'm grateful to her. I'm grateful to her for what she has done, and I believe that it has been I think her interim report was extremely useful to the government in making the changes that we have.
Mr. Speaker, when the years to come, when the Prime Minister reflects on his time as PM and in government, what does he think will be his proudest moment? Will it be breaking his own lockdown laws and being fined? Will it be misleading Parliament? Or will it be lying to the Queen and presiding over such a toxic environment that, as according to Sue Gray's report, staff in his office had a lively party the night before her husband's funeral?
Mr. Speaker, I will look back many years hence on from this period. I think the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe wasn't half bad. Being the first country anywhere in the world, Mr. Speaker, to put an approved vaccine in anybody's arms, and to come out of COVID faster than any other European country, those are already very considerable achievements. To say nothing of delivering Brexit, which she would not have done, and nor would the party opposite, Mr. Speaker.
Sarah Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was asked whether he thought any other Prime Minister would have allowed such rule-breaking on their watch. Well, I was a senior civil servant for two Prime Ministers, Gordon Brown and the Honourable Lady for Maidenhead, and I can tell him, when I was a senior civil servant, no such behaviour would have occurred. What is clear in the Sue Gray report, to me, is the number of comments of civil servants who knew they were doing something wrong. We seem to have got away with it. This is somewhat of a comms risk. People shouldn't be walking around waving bottles of wine in front of cameras, and it goes on. They knew they were doing something wrong. Did the Prime Minister, at any stage, at any of these events he was at, think he was doing something wrong?
No, well, I've tried to be clear with the House about that. And by the way, she talks about serving previous Prime Ministers. I thank her for her service, but I want to assure I've never thrown a stapler at anybody, or an ashtray, Mr. Speaker.
I'm in Newlands.
Right. Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. His utterances on PartyGate at that dispatch box have proven to be the fantasy we all knew they were. Allegra Stratton resigned for merely joking about a party. She's more integrity in a little finger than the Prime Minister could ever hope of possessing. This charlatan of a Prime Minister is without shame, without credibility, and without any hope of ever winning another election. So does he agree that he will sacrifice anyone or any institution, including his own party, to try and keep his ever-weakening grip on power?
Mr. Speaker, I know why they want to remove me from office. It's because we're going to get on and win the next election, and that's the reality.
Lynn Brown.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the Prime Minister could help me again. If no rules were broken, what on earth did Martin Reynolds mean when he said we got away with it? Referring, of course, to the Bring Your Own Booze party on the 20th of May. What did he mean, we got away with it?
Mr. Speaker, I can't give an exegesis of what's in the report. She can read the report for herself.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister says he's sorry, we know he's sorry for getting caught. One of my constituents, Louise, was in hospital in November 2020. A very elderly woman lay in the bed next to her, crying and begging for her family. She asked Louise to phone and ask them why they hadn't come to see her. The last thing she said to Louise was, "I won't be here in the morning." She died with a student nurse holding her hand, which haunts Louise to this day. Does the Prime Minister agree with Louise when she says he's a liar and must resign?
I have every sympathy for Louise and all those who have suffered, but no, Mr. Speaker, for the reasons I've given, I don't agree with what he's just said.
Stephen Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has presided over a culture of law-breaking, entitlement and privilege in Downing Street. He cannot credibly plead ignorance on that point. In his statement, he has sought to try to rationalise this by saying that the staff in Downing Street were working long, pressurised hours battling COVID. So what does he say to the thousands of doctors, nurses, care workers, the emergency services, cleaners, security staff, and indeed civil servants up and down the country who didn't have alcohol-fuelled work events, parties or leaving dues?
Mr. Speaker, I simply say to them what I've said since the pandemic began, which is I thank them from the bottom of my heart.
Dean McCabe.
When I previously asked the Prime Minister to release the publicly funded photographs of these incidents, he declined because of the police investigation. Is there any conceivable reason, Mr. Speaker, why the full publicly funded catalogue of these incidents should not now be released so that the public can see and judge for themselves?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that, to the best of my knowledge, I think all the evidence has been seen by Sue Gray and by the Metropolitan Police. There may be issues about what else can be released more generally, but he has, I believe, a representative. The public has, I think, a representative sample of the images.
Nick Allen.
Speaker, 5 times in a 5-page report, the Prime Minister indicates that he takes responsibility. But in actual fact, he hasn't, not once. During the pandemic, all MPs asked our constituents to adhere to the guidelines to protect themselves, their family, their friends, their colleagues and the wider community. Prime Minister, with the benefit of hindsight, do you believe you set a good example, one that you can look back with pride?
Mr. Speaker, where I fell short and where we fell short, I apologise. I want to thank all colleagues who asked their constituents to follow the guidelines. And I think, actually, yes, the government can be very proud of a lot of what we delivered during COVID.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've waited for this report, and looking through this report, it's clear to me that the Prime Minister did break the rules on one occasion when he was surprised by a birthday greeting between meetings in the Cabinet room. This is a rule breach, clear rule breach, but one for which he has apologised, and I accept his apology. It is also clear from this report that there was other examples which he was not present at and which he did not break the rules at, but which others did, that occurred repeatedly during the period of the lockdown. So I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, what has he learned from this, and how do the changes that he's put in place at number 10 make sure that such examples and the attitudes that allow them to occur will not persist now on?
I thank her very much, and I think that my honourable friend from Lichfield asked substantially the same question. It's, I think the lines of command and responsibility in number 10 are now much sharper, thanks to the installation of a new second permanent secretary with direct responsibility for everybody in the building.
Mr. Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister must see that people partying until the small hours on a regular basis at Downing Street paints an awful picture to everybody else who has followed the rules. But I want to ask him specifically about the gathering in his flat on the 13th of November 2020, which, contrary to what he said today, hasn't been fully investigated by Sue Gray. Can he confirm, for the record, that everyone who was there that evening was working and that there was no alcohol, no music or anything else that people might reasonably conclude constituted a party?
I'm grateful to him, and I think I answered this already. I've got nothing to add to what Sue Gray says in her report, or what the Metropolitan Police found in their investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Prime Minister would love for these incidents to be swept under the carpet and for us all to forget about it. But the Panorama documentary and this Sue Gray report shows the utterly inappropriate and shameless behaviour that took place at number 10 during lockdowns. Now, the Prime Minister has said that he wants to appreciate his officials at number 10, and by doing this, he had parties that took place every Friday at 4 p.m, an open bar and excessive drinking. This is a way in which he appreciated his staff, and the Sue Gray report states the excessive consumption of alcohol is not appropriate in a professional workplace at any time. To take responsibility is to resign. The Prime Minister has said he's not going to do this. Can he say what he's doing now to appreciate his staff and officials at number 10?
I think what we're already doing, Mr. Speaker, is sharpening up the management of number 10, making it easier for staff to complain, to voice their anxieties. But I've just got to say, Mr. Speaker, that we've got to get on with the business of government, and I know that she wants to persist with this subject, but I want those officials to focus on the priorities of the people.
Speaker, it's rumoured the Chancellor will shortly finally be announcing some further help for our struggling constituents with the cost of living crisis. But we know how things work in this government with its enormous team of spin doctors. Has his government deliberately held back the details of that desperately needed help in order to provide some cover for the damning impact of this report?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many in this country, have lost loved ones. My constituents have lost loved ones. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost loved ones. And the longer this goes on, the more traumatizing their experience is. I can tell him that sitting through these statements is very traumatizing for many of us who've lost loved ones and our constituents. That is why we cannot go on like this. Can the Prime Minister now do the decent thing, do the honourable thing, and accept responsibility and step down so that we can all move on and get on with our lives and make sure that people who've suffered so much are protected and served properly?
I thank her, and I of course, appreciate the suffering of those on whose behalf she speaks, but I do believe it is the duty of the government to get on as fast as we can with sorting out the priorities of the people now.
Can I thank Sue Gray for publication of her report? It's good to see the final article. We all recognise that there are many lessons to be learned from the handling of the pandemic from all levels of government, as the report states. Can the Prime Minister, working alongside devolved administrations, give an indication as to when he will be launching the public inquiry on COVID-19 that he promised? The general public have questions to ask and answers must be given. When will the general public have their say?
I thank him. As he knows, Baroness Hallett has been Heather Hallett has been appointed to head the inquiry, and he can expect developments soon.
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely imperative that the British public are told the whole truth. Everyone hopes that there have been no reductions or changes to this report. Indeed, Downing Street said its intention was to publish the report in full, in its entirety, unchanged. So can I ask the Prime Minister, did anyone in number 10 receive a copy of the report yesterday? And were any requests made for sections to be removed or altered? And following requests specifically, were there any changes made to the section relating to the governing in the number 10 flat on the 30th of November 2020?
I can tell him that I received the report myself, and I'd not seen it before until shortly after 10 o'clock this morning. And on his second point about no, Mr. Speaker, no, on the second point about the events on November the 13th, I've addressed those several times.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, now we know that while the Prime Minister was happy to let the bodies pile high outside Downing Street, he was also happy to let the bottles pile up high inside Downing Street. We also know that he's come to that dispatch box and denied point blank that events took place that we now know did take place and which turned Downing Street into the most notorious party flat in central London. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has diminished and demeaned his office, and he speaks of leadership, but any leader should know when it's time to go. Why won't the Prime Minister go so that the country can move on and move on as it needs to without him in office?
Mr. Speaker, I think what he's just said is unworthy of the civil servants, some of whom, I'm sad to say, were fined, who worked night and day to minimise suffering and minimise casualties during COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Ruby Fuller lived by the motto, live kindly, live loudly,
in pursuit of social justice. Ruby died from cancer on the 20th of May 2020 as the Bring Your Own Booze party was happening in Downing Street. Her grandparents and her young friends had to say goodbye to Ruby by Zoom. What does the Prime Minister have to say to Ruby's friends, young people in my constituency who are listening to him today blame everybody but himself? And when will he accept that every single day he remains in Downing Street, our politics is corroded further?
Mr. Speaker, I repeat my condolences to those who suffered from COVID, to those who couldn't get the treatment that they needed during the pandemic, to the family of Ruby who couldn't see her when she was suffering from cancer. And all I can say now is that we want to get on with our work, which is to clear the backlogs, particularly for cancer patients up and down the country.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the bereaved families of bereaved families of COVID, this report will unleash another cruel wave of loss and grief and anger. So, as a bare minimum, will the Prime Minister promise that the interim findings of the COVID inquiry will be published before the next general election?
That is a matter for the Chair.
Andrew Gwynne.
Thank you. To those MPs that have clearly gone for their lunch, can I advise them that the Prime Minister's humble pie is off? But was the Prime Minister at the party on the 18th of December 2020, the so-called wine and cheese evening, which lasted for 5 hours and when, and I quote, red wine was spilled on one wall and the event was crowded and noisy, after which a cleaner was forced to clean this up? Was he at it at any stage of the proceedings?
I think you will find the answer to that question in Sue Gray's report.
I won't be asking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The conclusion of the report states, Mr. Speaker, the conclusion of the report states that Ms Gray found that some staff had witnessed and been subjected to behaviours at work that are concerning, multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of security and cleaning staff. For me, that is the most damning, but also the most telling part of the report, Prime Minister. Why is it that people like him and the people at work at Number 10 think that cleaners, security guards, nurses, teachers are beneath them, less important than them? Why, Mr. President? Shame on you.
Mr. Speaker, I condemn such behaviour, and actually, when I was running London Transport, for instance, I instituted much tougher penalties for those who abused our staff. And I support tougher penalties for those who abuse shop workers, Mr. Speaker. And those are the values I stand for.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wine Time Friday, karaoke, grown men drinking shots of apple sours. How can anyone on the benches opposite honestly describe these as work events? Misleading the House is a very serious issue, as the Prime Minister well knows, but taking the people of this country for fools is far worse. And whilst he's busy trying to defend the indefensible, I'd like to know, Mr. Speaker, how many of my former colleagues does he think will be joining me on these benches after today?
That's the point. Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will find the answers to his questions in the Sue Gray report. I really don't have anything more to add.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the actions of this Prime Minister, standards of public life in the UK now lie face down in the gutter. The Prime Minister wants us all to move on collectively. Well, let me assure this derailed Prime Minister, there is no collective in Scotland of which you are a part. So as his authority lies festering in a steaming pile of incredulity, will he set out to the people of Scotland the productive and positive role he will play with the Scottish Government in allowing and enacting a referendum on independence so we can finally free ourselves of exactly the type of behaviour you typify?
Mr. Speaker, I will continue to work productively with the government in Scotland, as we did throughout the pandemic, not least in delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, in the furlough programme, and everything else that we did together that shows that we're stronger together.
Rachel Maskell.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the question put by my honourable friend, the member for Wirral South, the Prime Minister said that he had not had time to apologise to the cleaning and security staff. Is he telling this House that Sue Gray and no official appraised him of one of the 8 conclusions of this report prior to him coming to the House today, or are they simply just not his priority?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. Since I saw the report this morning, I haven't had time to be able to identify the custodians or the cleaners in question. But as I said earlier on to the honourable lady opposite, as soon as I can, I will apologise to them in person.
Christine Jardine
suggested that perhaps we should want to turn the page on what has happened. And believe me, I think everybody in this place would like to turn the page and never have to revisit again. But the only way that we can do that is if the Prime Minister accepts responsibility fully and moves on, so we can turn that page.
Speaker, I am going to move on with the government's agenda, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that the Prime Minister struggles with the truth. But can he vouch to me and to this House that he will do everything that he possibly can to stave off his backbenchers and instead lead the campaign to protect his precious union?
More of that, please.
Listen, Mr. Speaker, I think increasingly the strongest advocates of the union of the United Kingdom are the Scottish Nationalist Party, who, by their incompetence, their overtaxing, their poor educational results, they can't even make the trains run on time, Mr. Speaker. They can't even buy some ferries without totally screwing it up, Mr. Speaker. They are terrific advocates of the United Kingdom. I thank them for what they're doing.
Order. Order. Thank you. Presentation of bill. Presentation of bill. Secretary George Eustace.
Oh, tell you what.
No, just nod. Clerk.
Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Bill.
Second reading what day?
Tomorrow.
Thank you. We now come to the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill Programme number 2 motion. Programme motion, Minister to move?
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill to be considered.
Now.
We begin with Government New Clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider the other selected new clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call Minister Julia Lopez to move Government New Clause 1.
Thank you. I beg to move. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to be making such good progress on this bill, which seeks to deliver world-class connectivity to our constituents, but also to improve the security of the devices that we all rely upon. If I may, I shall start by explaining the need for the government amendments tabled in the name of the Secretary of State. Since those amendments are very straightforward, I shall then move on to the more substantial matter of the remaining amendments, which I suspect honourable members and right...